Reporting is hard. Because we're doing it probably. And then we're supposed to be but six of 19. I'm yeah. Yeah. A lot of backs like 35, average 35. Okay. Where does 25, I think it was 30, 25. So the majority of them have backs.
All right, 6:30. I'd like to call this meeting of the Park Township Planning Commission to order. First item is we're missing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. Who's not here? Board liaison, right? Of course, Terry. Yep. A new person hasn't been assigned yet, so we're down one. Okay, first item is approval of the agenda. Any corrections, additions, subtractions? If not, I'd like a motion.
Support.
Take your pick. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Next is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. So any comments, corrections? I have one just to start it. There were 6 people present according to the notes. And then we had votes of 5-0 on items 2 and 3, which doesn't quite add up. And the same thing at the very end. Anything else? I have another one on page 7. Just before adjourn, it says Louise Trell motion to adjourn. And then right after adjourn, it talks about the motion. I don't think that's minor, but I don't think we need it 2 places. Yeah. If there are no other comments or corrections, then I'd like a motion to approve as amended.
Motion to approve as amended.
Support. Thank you. Any other comments? If not, call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. The next item on the agenda is a public comment period. Public comment is for general comments that aren't necessarily related to something that's on the agenda tonight. We will have a public hearing on the, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, Delbene? Okay. There will be a public hearing, so if you have comments on that, please wait for that. But otherwise, if you have general comments, feel free. We'll need your name and address and you'll get about 3 minutes. So anybody want to speak? If not, I'll close the public comment period. And now we're on to item 5, the public hearing on the Del Bend PUD amendment. And Mika, would you like to start it off?
So this is something that's a little bit unusual for the Planning Commission to hear. PUDs in Park Township are not able to apply for variances. If you're in a PUD, you're not able to apply for a variance with the Zoning Board of Appeals. So if you're in a platted lot, if you're in a neighborhood that's been a land division, other formats, you can go to the ZBA if you have something that'd like to be changed. The way our ordinance is written, it comes back to the Planning Commission as some kind of amendment to the PUD. Now, there are some very minor amendments that staff can make. This one was large enough that it's something that would definitely have been a conversation at the ZBA. I did consult with our attorney, Mr. Martin, on this and decided that this was kind of the best path to go, is to bring this to you. So the application is for a parcel that has a very small building envelope. So when the building envelope was established, when the PUD was put together. It's a corner lot and it has quite a small building envelope. Now the homeowner would like to would like to expand their home. And so they're asking for an amendment to the PUD. And this is a minor amendment, so it only needs to be at the planning commission. Doesn't have to go onto the board, but they're asking for an amendment to the PUD that would allow them to make that expansion.
Okay. Any quick questions, or we'll have the applicant speak? So come on up. I think we know your address and your name.
Well, my husband and I, we've always talked about how fun it would be to have a pool. And in our subdivision, it would have to be an indoor pool if we were going to have it. It would be fun, but now we've gotten to the point where we need it. It's more important for us than it is fun. My husband's in the process, starting in January, of getting 3 reconstructive surgeries. And one of the best rehabs, we were told, is aqua aerobics or water aerobics. So we thought, well, it's time to get going and let's figure out how we can do this. We went and we saw Mika and we were instructed about a PUD, which I've learned more about a PUD than I've ever wanted to learn. But the only way the only side really that we can do this is on the west side of our property, which our neighbors that are on our west side are here in support of this also. We have a window well on the west side, which covers our really available building envelope right now. And on the west side, we have a 50-foot side setback. Because we're on the corner, I guess that's considered our back, but it's really our side because our driveway is right there. It's our side setback. So we consulted an attorney because Mika's right. We couldn't do a variance. We had wanted to go for a variance, but the attorney told me this is where we have to go. So this is where I am. We'd like to have our building envelope increased from 50 foot on the side to 10 feet on the side. Now, our PUD has 19 homes and you've got all the paperwork there of the homes and the layout in there. And I'm a numbers person, so I like to look and see what we've got here. Of the 19 homes, 17 of them have 10-foot side setbacks. Ours doesn't, and the one across the street from us doesn't. We are supposed to have 50-foot back or rear setbacks on all the lots. But if you look on the diagram that has all the PUD on it, you'll see that I'd say it's about 6 of 19 lots have the 50-foot back setback. The rest of them we have a sand dune behind us. So the rest of them have 25 average, 30, 35. It's not specific on all of them, but that's my assumption is that there's only 6 of the 19 that have this 50-foot. So if we were to go forward and we were going to get this passed, our setbacks would be 2 10-foot side setbacks. We call them side. We'd have a 40-foot in the front, and we'd also have a 40-foot on the other side, which it wouldn't be a 50-foot back one, but the majority of our neighbors don't have 50-foot back ones either. So we didn't think it was out of the ordinary. If you look at lot 2, while you've got the papers out there, you'll see that they have a similar acreage to ours, yet they have more than 2 times the building envelope than we would have, even with the increase in our side setback, Our current building envelope is 3,271 square feet. Our neighbors is 8,360, or there's another one, 9083. But with our proposed increase, that would increase our building envelope 2,767 square feet, with giving us a total of 6,038 square feet of building envelope, which is far less than the other homes in our neighborhood. There's 8 homes that still would have larger building envelopes than ours. I think because it's on the corner is why this was designated this way, but we're trying to increase in a way that we think won't negatively impact the neighborhood. You have several letters from the neighborhood. I went to one side of the neighborhood and knocked on doors and got letters from them. I could have gone the other route, but I thought this might be enough to let you know that we have a lot of support in our neighbors. And like I said, our neighbors volunteered to come and speak if you have any questions. They're the ones who would be really impacted by this. And our builder is also here. We don't have a specific plan. What you have in front of us is a wish. The original pool person that we were going to have build for us backed out in October because his calendar was filling up and he didn't want to keep a spot for a maybe, because this is what we have to do. We don't have a yes that we can go forward yet. So we lost him, but we have another one. And our architect said, let's not do any more until we have a yes, because it's going to start to get really costly. So our builder graciously has offered to be here if you have any building questions. But again, we don't have anything specific. So we're just hoping that just because we're the first to ask for an amended PUD, that doesn't negatively affect us.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Okay. Obviously, you'll be here and we can ask questions if we have further ones.
Right.
Can you hear okay?
Yeah, I can hear okay.
Okay. If I get here, how about if I'm here?
Thank you.
Yep. Reminder, I'll get on your mics. Okay, so let's proceed with the discussion. This is a case where we would be approving a change to a PUD similar to a minor change. It's a minor change, but not a small minor change.
Big enough change to go to the planning commission. There's also a public hearing associated with that.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, for what it's worth, the ZBA gets these kinds of requests frequently,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because of the corner lots. We run into this a lot, and we get relief wherever we can, and it makes sense. And so I would just offer that to the
Okay.
commission.
Thank you. I was going to ask that question. Any other immediate questions, discussion? I have a few things that we need to be concerned about are precedents. I don't know what kind of precedent we're setting because this is a PUD, so it's a little different. Whether we're making a permanent solution for a temporary problem. So I think we have to look at this and say, okay, regardless of the reasons for it, this is the change we're making. Good reasons or not, whatever. A few notes from that Mika had in here about that we want to be clear on what our factors are so that if it does come up again, people can see why. There's another note. I had. Oh, whether like a lesser relaxation would be appropriate. You know, smaller area. Shar, have you been assigned here yet?
No, but I can get text messages all day. Don't you want to do planning commission?
Okay. So keeping those kind of things in mind as we go over this and as we hear more would be good. So with that, there's a official public hearing on this, and similar to what we had for the public comment period, state your name and address. There's a paper up there, right? So write down your name and address for the record, and then feel free to comment, and somewhere around 3 minutes is appropriate. So anybody here would like to speak? This is your chance to speak.
I'm Janet Hostetler, and I live to the west of them at 3924 Dune Shadow Drive, and I'll put my name and address here. So yes, we have a very large envelope on our lot. We can go all the way to 10 feet within their property, while they have this 50-foot, variance. It doesn't, we have some outbuildings in that area that we're allowed to have, but they can't build in that area. So it does not influence us negatively because the people on our other side have the 10-foot and all of us have that same area. So we don't think it's any issue. We have the dune right up behind them. They have another property. So it's a little bit different in the way the houses lie there. But you can see from we're lot 9, you can see how large ours is and how far back we can go. Our house is very small in comparison to that large area there, but it seemed unfair that they don't get that opportunity, and we would not have any problem with them doing that.
Okay, thank you. And we do have all the letters in our packet, and so anybody else? Okay,
What is your lot number?
9.
9. They're
So you can
just
see us, we're
west.
to the west.
Yep.
And we go way back, but our house is kind of in the middle front of that.
So there are apparently no other people who want to speak at this point, so I need a motion to close the public hearing. Second. Copenhagen and Louise. Further discussion? And then a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you. All right, discussion.
The only comment that I would add, and I know you're not to the point of having architectural plans yet, but when you do that size of an expansion off to one side of the building, it's just similar materials and character and color. Because that you are coming right up against that 10-foot border with other people. So I think as long as you maintain the character and the of materials and the color that's compatible with the house that's already there, then it doesn't seem like something that stands out.
Okay. Other questions? I have a question. You have an HOA.
I was gonna say, we have an architectural committee that has to approve what we do, so. Yeah.
They would watch out.
There is a
Mr.
letter
Chair,
in there.
I'm sorry, could you have her come up?
Oh, I see.
Huh?
Sorry.
Microphone?
Sorry. We do have an architectural committee, and there is a letter in there from the person who is the chair of the
Architecture.
you got it, committee. So, yeah, we would have to have that
So-
approved.
Yeah, he thinks that the architectural committee would approve.
He does. Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, that would be, HOA probably doesn't have to get involved beyond the architectural committee. Okay, thank you. Any precedent here could be for other PUDs. But this strikes me as being very similar, as Dennis was saying, to things that come in front of the zoning board. Corner lots are always a pain. And I don't know, they chose to do it this way when they laid it out for some reason. I don't think we'd be setting a precedent for non-PUDs because those typically go to the zoning board. It would be a precedent so that lot 1, which is directly across the street, might possibly want to come in. They have a 50-foot side yard also. And then if they decided to do something, I think there would be a great, I don't know if difficulty is the right word, but you would be hard pressed to turn them down having approved this one. But that's the only other one in this PUD.
I think, doesn't 18 have a 50?
18. Yeah, but they have two 10-foot side yards.
Okay.
So that's very clearly, they have one backyard, one front, and two sides.
Gotcha.
This one kind of has I don't know what you want to call it, two fronts
Two front yards and that area.
and a side yard, yeah.
And one side yard.
Um, the I think they have also been very thorough, and I would definitely have this in the notes of getting approval from neighbors. Now, I didn't check all the addresses, but I know you have next door neighbors, which if I can, across, behind. Oh,
So, yeah, we have across the street, which is the one that you were saying might,
Yeah.
is the only one that's impacted with a 50-foot again. We have across the street, we have behind us, we have next door to us who are here. We also, then I just went down the one street, Oak Bluff, and I got that whole side. And then I thought, if I go to the, I didn't want to impose my issues on every single neighbor.
Right.
So I kind of stopped there and hoped that that would be enough to.
Okay, great. That's why I hadn't mapped all the addresses, but I assumed it was all.
Yeah, it was, I did the one whole
contiguous.
street and then.
Okay. Thank
Did
you.
you make your homeowners association board aware of what you were contemplating?
Yes, and the house across the street from us, he's the president. I'm the treasurer, but so I know about it. And the secretary also, their family, they are lot number Beagles 19. And there's a
Okay.
letter in there from them also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I believe though, with I live in an HOA with the PUD, and we actually have to have everybody approve it before it comes to something like this. So I don't know if you, in our HOA, in our PUD, we only have 7 homes, but anytime there's an architectural change, everybody has to sign it, the president has to approve it, and then it would come before us just to make sure that everybody is supportive of it. Maybe yours is different. No, the entire HOA, the homeowners association, usually everybody has to.
Len, if I may, I think in their HOA, like our HOA, there's an architectural committee that can do the approval.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to go to everybody within the HOA.
in ours, everybody has to,
Yeah.
beyond the architecture, so.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure, because we've actually had the same thing in ours happen where people needed a variance of some sort. And so everybody had to sign it before it came in. I just want to make sure you just don't want anybody to be surprised.
I think the commission could make that a specification to approval.
Yes.
Clarify for me,
It would preclude someone just coming in from a PUD on their own with wanting to, if they have to go through the work of preparing for the architectural committee and having it approved by their board, that would really lessen the amount of instances where I think this would occur.
right? I think if I can expand, it's good for us to be clear that approval by us does not override approval of the HOA. I believe that's correct, because HOAs, you have agreements person to person in the HOA
Yeah, it depends.
that are more can be more restrictive
They
than,
can be more restrictive. Yes, they can't be less restrictive.
yes.
Is that the direction that it goes? It's kind of more or less kind of depends on the case, but yeah, like the HOA can't say we're going to change your setbacks. That's something that's kept with the township, but the
Right.
HOA, the township, in this case, hasn't said these are the architectural standards for the PUD, so the HOA has that ability.
Right, but we could say, as far as we're concerned, from the PUD point, you can do this, but the HOA could say, that's very nice that the planning commission said that, but no, you can't.
That would be my understanding.
Yeah.
I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I just wanted to clarify. My understanding was we were evaluating the request specific to expanding the building envelope, not necessarily the proposed expansion, right? So when we're talking about that, what they're building or how it architecturally fits in isn't really something that we would put a condition on, because that's not what we're weighing in. I mean, I'm sure it's great feedback and helpful, but our focus truly is, should we allow
An expanded
this-
building envelope or not.
correct, correct.
So just for clarity, Mr. Chairman, so with what you just said, we could approve it here, but you could then take it back to your HOA and they could say no. So, because I mean, they're really the ones that have the final authority on that. So that's just for clarity.
Yeah. So just to cover it while we're here, this is not necessarily appropriate, but the ZBA, if it's a non-use variance, in other words, a dimensional variance, their rules are that strict compliance with the zoning ordinance regarding minimum area setbacks, et cetera, would render conformity unnecessarily burdensome. So that's kind of a judgment in this case. Is it burdensome? Well, no, they want to do something, but that granting the variance would do substantial justice to the applicant as well as to other property owners in the PUD. So, and that's what they've presented as the other people think it's fair, right? So this is what the ZBA would look at. One of the things that they has if a lesser relaxation than applied for would give substantial release and be more fitting in some fashion. So that's one possibility. And that the problem is due to the unique circumstances of the property. So sometimes you'll get a piece of property and it's not really appropriate here, but in the case, they have a very steep dune behind, so the rear yards don't go back as far, but there's nobody there, so it doesn't matter. Sometimes you'll get funny triangular lots or something and the rules don't apply. And so the question is if it's unique circumstances, which I don't know that applies here. And the last one is one when I was on the ZBA that we refer to often is whether the problem is self-created. In other words, here's an example. We had people come in who said they bought a lot on the lake that's 50 feet wide and they want to put in a house that's 40 feet wide. Well, you can't do that because the side yards aren't big enough. You need 10-foot side yards. So this is a self-created problem where you wanted to build this house, but you bought this property and they don't fit. This doesn't seem so much to me to be a self-created problem. I mean, in a sense it is because you want to build, you have a house with a building envelope and now you want to make it bigger. Right. But the kind of a judgment is, does it fit with the neighborhood, et cetera? Is it reasonable? So
I know it's not necessarily the question on the table, but as I was considering the information, I was essentially obviously considering the applicant's lot, but also the most comparable lot as well. Because again, understanding that decision will apply. If we say yes here, then if there was interest there,
yeah,
that could be a future ask.
And I think to me, that's the precedent we would be setting here.
I think one of the things when I was going through this, I thought about was precedent and also consistency. And I think one of the pieces of information that was brought out is that 17 of 19 homes have 10-foot setbacks. So I think this would actually help create a little bit more consistency. Understanding it's a corner lot, it has its own unique elements to that, as I think Dennis has mentioned as well.
Yeah, when they laid it out, they actually defined where the cul-de-sac is as the front yard, because that's the 40-foot setback.
Right.
Opposite that is the rear setback. Well, then there's another 40-foot road setback and you get a side. But in this case, I have to say, it makes me a little uncomfortable, but not terribly so. I don't think it would make any difference to anybody. if that was a side, I mean, it's consistent down the road. I don't know that it causes any problem whatsoever.
And that's usually the judgment
Yeah.
that the ZBA uses when
Yeah.
it's confronted with a similar request.
And I don't know if that was something, well, in the zoning ordinance at that time, that if you have a corner lot, this is how you lay it out, which seems like a funny ordinance to me, but.
That's actually still the way that it's written,
Yeah.
which creates exactly what you would expect.
Yeah.
Which is our next project.
Yeah. On the list.
Here, these are the other ones, I'm on board.
Oh, I have one other question. Obviously, there's a shed on your property that would have to come out, and I just pasted off. And the shed on the neighbor's property is very close to the line, isn't it? Yeah, but in fact goes over the line. So how are you going to deal with that? Yes, please.
So on the diagram that you have, the shed will be, our shed will be moved behind or on the south side of whatever gets constructed. It will be tucked back behind whatever is constructed so that
Okay.
it is moved and out of the way.
You
Yeah.
can't put all that shed stuff in your new addition.
I wish. Yeah.
And then the neighbor's shed?
The neighbor's shed is there. They have said that they would move it if it is an issue.
Okay,
We don't have an issue with it, but if that is an issue, then that
okay,
will be tended to, but
okay. Thank you. Anybody care to make a motion at this point? We can also always have further discussion after.
Motion to approve the request as submitted, with 10-foot side setback.
Support.
Second, yep.
Further discussion. Everybody comfortable with it? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations.
Thank you.
pretty sure I have all my papers out of order.
The next item on the agenda is a public hearing regarding the Outdoor Discovery Center Redlands Special Use and Site Plan Review. And if I may, there are two parts to this. There's a special use permit, which is something that the Planning Commission votes on and does not go to the Board of Trustees. So we make the final decision on this one as opposed to many of the things we deal with. So once we give the special use, then that's with the land, it carries forward. But to build anything, they have to come back with a site plan. And the site plan is a separate approval. Thank you. So before we go to the public hearing, before we hear from the applicant, do you want to address that any further, how we'll be approaching this?
Yes, so there are those two, there are those two components to it. And this was, the special use needs to be noticed, published to the paper, sent to the neighbors within 300 feet. The special use would be saying, yes, the planning commission agrees with this as a private park, which is permitted in the zoning district. So as I think you're aware, this came before you before for a rezoning request. The planning commission said, we like the project, we'd rather not rezone, we'd rather change the zoning district to allow this sort of thing by right rather than having to do a rezoning in this area. The township board looked at that evaluation and said, like the way you think, but no, we're actually just going to go ahead and rezone that. So that rezoning happened. That was when the first time that you saw this project. So now the second step here is to do the special use approval. There's also a site plan review as part of that. So there's been some changes to the site plan. They've got some more information as far as the way that some of their bike pathway trails are going to be set up. And I think that they'll talk about that a little bit tonight. but they'd like to come back next month for a more complete site plan review. So the thinking is evaluate the special use request tonight. There are two different sections in our ordinance that have the standards for the special use review. Those are on page 5 and 6 of your memo. And then there's a site plan evaluation as well. You're welcome to look at that, to ask any questions. If there's anything that you see in the site plan this month that you can bring to them, then that would speed things along for the next month, but it will come back again next month.
Yeah, we'd prefer to have it when they come next month, that it be nice and smooth. So, any questions before we have the applicant? All right.
Good evening, Nate Bosch with the ODC Network. So the information you have in front of you is pretty similar actually to when we brought the project for the rezoning application back in the day. Obviously, as Mika noted, we have added a little bit more layers of detail to this. We've been working with a bike park consultant out of Bentonville, Arkansas, who's been helping us kind of design some of these features. And really the intent of the project is to create a mountain biking outdoor facility that is unique to many of the area here. There's not a lot of facilities like this. And is offering an opportunity for kids of all ages to start to build and kind of groom their skills in out mountain biking. And so we're offering some varying levels of bike trails. So we'll have a Strider bike course in the middle there. And then also a larger loop that goes around the outside with a terrain skills area on the east side of the property. Really, the main function of this is kind of those two parts. One would be the bike park element of this, and also just kind of referring back to the legacy of what the property was. So we are maintaining a section of the blueberries that were on there previously, and working to celebrate the kind of the donor and the legacy family that owned the property, the Mulders. So that we are developing a small parking lot along the south edge of the property there off of Greenlee. And also then I'm working into doing some trails that will kind of be pedestrian oriented as well. So maybe to speak to a little bit of what Mika mentioned, some of the things that have developed since we submitted the paperwork have been understanding a little bit more of the grading implications. So a big part of this is a part of that skills area is elevating that grade up so that we can create some slope for the kind of the terrain elements that would be out there. To do that, we're trying to leverage some of the on-site soil so we're not trucking in loads and loads and loads of soil. So we've been working through a little bit of that and understanding what the balance of that looks like. And so part of that bigger change was looking at more of a central feature. It's become more of a pond because of the soil that we needed. And obviously with the township's requirements for ponds, we want to make sure that we're kind of in accordance with that as well. So that's been a bigger one. We've been working with Eagle, just with doing some initial research. The property had shown on their wetland viewer as a pretty significant wetland. I think that's all historical data. So we met out on site with them, validated that it's a historical thing and isn't actually current, and outlined that there are a few wetlands just along the roadway and the ditch line that we are coordinating and permitting with them right now, actually. So yeah, and then also there's a few things we've been working through with the road commission. So another change that came out of some of those coordination conversations have been the elimination of the pedestrian crossing at 152nd and Greenlee. Just given the condition of the ditch lines that are there and the requirements the road commission has for proximity to the stop sign, it just made it really difficult to achieve that in a safe and good way. So that's been a big change that we are tracking. So I'll pause there and open up for any questions that you might have for me.
I have, and we can get to these later. I'm curious who is funding this, the actual construction.
That would be the Mulder family. Yep.
The Mulder family is?
Yep.
Good for them. And along the same line, long-term maintenance, where is that coming from?
That would be, we would work and maintain the property as the ODC network.
ODC.
So we have an agreement in place with them that they would offer the property as this park space, and fund the initial construction, and then we would own it, or we would operate it moving forward. So
Okay. One thing that I will ask when there are signs in parking lots, we have a bike path in front of that. Often times people want to put the sign too close to the street so that a bike or a car pulling out of the parking lot won't be able to see bicyclists very easily.
oh, sure.
And I've always asked for at least a full car length, 20 feet between.
Yeah, we are actually in the process. Another one of those changes that we are working through is that will be a one-way parking lot. So you have a one-way in and a one-way out. So to maybe speak to that point, we would hopefully be eliminating as much of that as possible by placing the sign near the entry point,
Right.
and then exiting traffic wouldn't have that same overlap. So
Yeah, it just strikes me, there'll be kids around and bicycles around and you
Yeah,
want to be able to
exactly.
see.
Yep, exactly. Want to make sure it's safe as possible. So
Okay.
How do you operate a private park, but it's open to the public? So you're gonna have, I guess, classes and things you're doing. So how do those two work together? I mean, if I were riding my bike through there, how do I know where I can ride and I can't ride? And, oh, you can't go there. There's a special class going on right now. How do you operate those two so that it works well together?
correct. Yeah. So I think the primary function of the property would be biking. And so that would be understood. We actually do that quite a bit at a lot of our other facilities right now that we own and operate. So we have a lot of overlapping uses at the Outdoor Discovery Center specifically, where it's open to the public dawn to dusk. And so they're able to leverage the space, but we also have a preschool on site that's utilizing it. We have Ed Network staff and programs that are coming in daily and utilizing that. So there's a lot of just kind of in concert working and scheduling and doing those sorts of things, but understanding that the public is going to be on site as well and making sure that it's just that we're kind of being according to that.
So from a public perspective, they can do anything that they want to when they're on site. Is that right? So they're.
Yeah, within the rules of the park, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
they can ride their bike anywhere and they can walk anywhere. So
Yeah, it was,
there's
yeah,
no restriction. You can't be on this path or this is closed right here, but it's.
No, there wouldn't be anything from a program perspective, or the only thing that would be is if we are doing maintenance or something like that, where we would want to make sure that we're being safe. But bike path would be open for public to use at any part of the day, and walking paths would be the same. So, and typically they just kind of work within each other. So,
Just trying to eliminate confusion.
Yep. It's fair.
Questions, Stephanie? Not much, Dave? Tom?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, and maybe I'm just not 100% looking, is the current plan for the existing property that's in place, the building, the Mulder existing property there, is that intended to stay in place as far as that building? And I'm trying to see.
Yeah. Yep. So the barn that's there now is going to stay as a barn. That was the kind of the ag barn that was being used for operating the farm that was there. So we're going to continue to use that to support, equipment and things that we need to operate the space. So, but it would not be open to the public in any way. So,
Okay. I guess the only other thing that I was looking at, we talked a little bit about the screening, and I directionally here, it's on the left side of the map.
so on the west side.
Yeah, the west
Yes.
side.
Yep.
It is the west. Okay, I was turning. Is that, I know there's active blueberry farming, I believe, just to the west of that. Are you comfortable at this point that that's going to be sufficient to be able to keep spray from generating over? Have there been thoughts? I know this is a lot of what you guys do, so.
Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind. One is there's a pretty significant hedgerow between the current blueberry fields on the west side of the hedgerow and then our property, or the property that's in question. So I think from that perspective, that would be, a sufficient visual and kind of physical screen. But from a spraying perspective, if there was active spraying happening, that would probably be something we would just want to make sure we're coordinating with the farmer who's doing that at the time. So maybe if it's occurring on a singular day or something, maybe we close the park down during those hours so that there's no overlap. But we'd certainly not we're not anticipating adding anything there that's going to block any of that likely. So,
So at this point, you're pretty comfortable that what's there is sufficient?
Yeah,
And if,
correct.
yeah, and coordination with spraying. would be-
Yeah, and thank you. We are also planning for that portion of the property. We are planning to add a significant amount of trees and kind of do a restoration reforestation project on the kind of the west and the north section of the property.
Okay.
So our conservation services team and us are working on planting a significant amount of trees in that area to kind of support that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Dennis? Anything pop to mind?
Nothing from me.
Okay. I had a couple of other questions similar to what Len was asking. Motorbikes. If I was a 10-year-old boy with a motorbike, I might want to go ride around on there.
That would be a possibility, but that wouldn't be permitted at all. So.
And how would that be enforced?
Good question. Pretty similar to how any other park would try to handle that. I mean, I think we're planning to try to monitor the site as much as possible and try to ensure that those sorts of activities don't happen. And if they do, we're trying to follow up with it. But
yeah, maybe that's something that would be dealt with if it becomes a problem.
Sure, correct. Yeah.
But you ride.
Right, yeah.
Riley Trails.
Oh, yes.
Do we ever have? I've never heard of motorbikes on there.
You've seen them.
I would be surprised if there weren't. You were another young man who might do that kind of thing. That's the only reason.
Well, definitely e-bikes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen e-bikes out
Yeah.
there. Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a potential problem. And another thing I'll just mention is, and I always get twisted in here, that corner. But that corner,
Yeah. Cooper Van Weeren, yeah.
yeah, Cooper Van Weeren, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. That the person who lives at the end of that cul-de-sac used to complain because kids were always parking at the end of the cul-de-sac and
Right.
drinking and whatever, doing whatever, making out. And they complained, and I would think this would be used for some of that, but I don't know what you can do about that either.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's
If I was a
parking
high
lots all
school
over the
kid.
place. Yeah.
There's a high school right over there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Did I hear correctly that the e-bikes would not be allowed either?
Yeah. No.
So I guess there'll be signage to that effect.
Yeah, we're planning kind of interpretive signage around the whole property that would outline the rules and kind of the requirements for the property for both bikers and walkers, and planning trail signage, which would delineate which parks or which paths are for bikers and which ones are for walkers. So trying to make sure that it's as clear as possible to eliminate any of that confusion. So.
And going back, we're getting into some of the site plan stuff, but
That's fine.
you wouldn't be bringing any dirt onto the property.
That's to be determined. We'll have to bring some like gravel and things for the trail system, and so
Okay.
we will be bringing and importing some of that to ensure that we have the proper materials. I think the idea is to limit how much we have to bring in because that's added cost.
Right.
So we want to be as mindful of that as possible. But I think the idea would be to leverage as much of the on-site soil as possible while also doing what we need to do to ensure that the trails are built properly and have the right like cross section in order to hold up to bike wear over time.
Yeah, there's not much in natural topography to maintain their.
No, it's very flat. It goes a little north to south, but it's pretty flat. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's always, I think you're almost unlimited in dirt you can move on site. Correct?
Mhm.
Except if you make a pond, then that, as you
Maybe
mentioned
have to-
earlier, you have to deal with that. So that'll all be taken care of as part of the
Correct.
process. Anything else?
What I'm not recalling on the property, are there blueberry plants that'll be decommissioned and torn out as a result of all of this? So-
They have already been torn out.
So it's.
Yeah, so yeah, most of them have been torn out. We kept a small section as kind of like that commemorative or like historical marker of it and kind of nod to agriculture. But most of the east half was actually removed a few years back and replanted with wildflowers.
Okay.
So
So, and it was done before, not because of this special use, but just
I mean, it was done with anticipation of developing
Something
this
happening.
property
Okay.
next year.
Okay.
And with it being the end of the season and the opportunity to kind of take care of that before the start of construction in any way,
Okay.
help prep the site, so.
If no further questions, we do have a public hearing on this issue.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to open that. So if anybody wants to comment as a public on this issue, this is your opportunity. Don't forget to put your name and address on there.
All right, I sure will. My name's Charlie Peterson. I've got the 10 acres north of the property. So we've got 1,008 of common lot line there. And Nate and his team have already kind of done a barrier kind of fencing on the property. So we're good with that, but we just like to make sure that it's got good signage, that because of where our residence is, they do the most they can to kind of block that area. Unfortunately, I think we're kind of backwards on the reforestation. Rather have it more on the east side than the west side. But, you know, I know things have progressed already and maybe it's something that they need to do. But, you know, for us, our house is right there. So to go from 20 acres of blueberries for the last 30 years to now a public park, I'd rather personally, as we're sitting on our back porch, not see, you know, the traffic that's going to occur. But that's more of a personal preference, I guess. But other than that, I'd wanted to also make sure that my zoning in this process didn't change. Okay.
It did not.
Okay. Yep. All right. Other than that, you know, I think it's a great project. I just like to make sure that I see the final plan and that we are all cognizant of some of those concerns.
Super. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson, if you leave your email on there, you can make sure that we send you that plan when it comes through.
Okay, perfect.
So pursuant to that, I think that's a good comment and everything's on paper still. It's cheaper to change when it's on paper than.
That's what I always thought. Yeah, right.
So I think that's a comment for the ODC. And another comment I had is to try to keep the bike paths. We should set some distance. We want the bike paths away from the property line. And there was a big drawing. There are so many papers here. I don't remember which piece of paper it was on, where it looked like it was 10 feet maybe from the property line. Yeah, no, this one, I think. Yeah. And other commissioners can comment, but it feels to me like you can sit down if you want. Thank you. Nope. My feeling is it should be at least 20 feet from the property line. 10 feet's pretty close. I'm up here. So this is the, yeah, this is, yeah, this is the water. Right. Yeah, still, there's a house here somewhere, and just keeping it a little further away, it doesn't hurt anything terribly. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Was that trail along the north property line. And the comment he made about where the house is, I didn't see the house on the map. There's a garage. Just being kind to the neighbors, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, if you had that 20-foot, it just gives you more vegetation area if you
Right.
need to provide that visual separation between adjoining properties.
Yep.
To me, that would make sense.
Okay.
Great.
So we got a bunch kind of into discussion of the site plan. I think unless there are more comments, and we will have more next week, and if some come up in this further discussion, we can talk about it. But there's a special use, which is what the hearing was about, and is something we should be able to decide tonight based on the information we have. So as I understand it, Mika, correct me if I'm wrong, this is not permitted by right, but it's something that is allowed. And so we have to vote to let them build the park first. And then later they would come back with the specifics of what they're going to do, which would be the site plan review, which is probably next month. So I guess at this point in it, that seems a little late in the game since we've already been rezoned. That it feels like a foregone conclusion that we would approve, that would allow the site, the special use.
So
But we should review the standards before we do that.
a question on special use, if it's approved special use, and just say 10 years down the road, somebody decides that we want to do something different, that's special use, how could it be? What could it be if we say special use? Could it be a lot of different things down the road? I mean, how, if you change what we approve here tonight to something different 10 years down the road, what does that process look like?
I think you would have to go through the same process. If you're approving a special use, you're approving a specific special use and not just, not just something in general. So, especially because it's typically paired with a site plan approval. So anytime you want to do a major change to a site plan, that has to be reviewed either by staff or planning commission as well. So it's not like, special uses are interchangeable. You could say, well, you have a special use permit and we told you it was going to be a park, but now you could do a bed and breakfast, completely unrelated. So each special use is kind of tied to that approval.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, so the special use review standards, it's section 3836. This is on page 5 of Mika's notes on this. So we should go through these. It's relatively short. And I think Mika has done a good job. And as I went through them, I saw only one thing that was a note 4, the fire chief is current. This is that whatever it is will be served adequately by essential public facilities and services, such as highways, streets, police, fire, drainage, refuse, etc. And staff's comment is the fire chief is currently reviewing it. Notes on the drainage ways and streets are indicated below. And these are expected to be met through processes at the Ottawa County Road Commission and the Water Resources Commission. So I think if we do the special use, that should be part of one of the conditions we specifically state. And then section 38-348, again, the same kind of thing. The second item there, not numbered, is what we were just discussing about trails on the north and west staying. What do we think the setback should be? So this is part of considering the proximity of adjoining properties. And I think we made our comment on that. I don't think it certainly wouldn't stop the special use. It's more of a consideration when the site plan is actually provided. Possibility of noise. This is not one that I would consider a lot of noise. If it was for motorbikes, then that would really be a consideration. Bicycles, not so much. There might be children laughing. Well, there's that pretty loud too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well aware of that.
Yeah. So that was a quick review, and any comments, anything that any of you noticed going through there? If not, what I like to do in these circumstances is to recommend approval. I think there may be one condition here. And to accept staff's findings on it rather than going through and rewording everything that's already been said. So if anybody's comfortable with that.
Yes.
I'm not going to make a motion.
Motion to approve the special use permit.
Any conditions on that?
The condition that the Ottawa County Road Commission or County Resource Commissions approve the plan.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? What we're doing is saying you can put this bike park on that property, but not yet approving what they can, how to do it. So, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you. Proceed. Thanks. And then, by the way, I haven't been on a bike park like this. I'm amazed at all the detail of rocks and wood jumps and
Oh, yeah.
it's way beyond what I expected.
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. I take my skinny wheel bike out there. I don't have, you can take an e-bike if the battery is not on it.
Which is twice as heavy as a normal bike.
Right.
Well, that's not a straight e-bike. Oh, yeah.
All right.
All right.
42 miles an hour, somebody else got to insist on it.
That would
Yeah.
be,
Here's my pedaling.
yeah, really, this is, it's really, yeah.
I'd like reading through that. The position of the rocks on the jumps and stuff like that. It's like.
It's amazing.
Can't-
It's a
can't
grand-
throw
I mean,
in
it
that
really
they're
is sophisticated
Yeah,
stuff.
right, yeah, even those little details of
Uh-huh.
the banks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
This once or twice.
Super.
Anybody need a break?
Okay, so I just want to
I'm
go.
looking your way.
Yeah, I'm not looking at you.
Am I right?
Item 7 is the renewable energy ordinance, and I would especially like Mika to kind of introduce and lead a little, well, you got to take notes too, so we'll try to
We'll do it.
go back and forth.
Use your microphones.
Yes.
So the renewable energy ordinance, it turns out to be a little bit of a beast. It's pretty big. So the 3 sections of the ordinance, we have the solar ordinance section, which is familiar. It's what you worked through last year. We have the wind ordinance. So Park Township had no existing wind energy ordinance from 2009. I brought that into this ordinance with almost no change. There were a couple of very small items that I added just as kind of safety items and clarity. And then the battery energy storage systems. And now that one I think is the most interesting because it's an entirely new technology or relatively new technology. So they're still learning how to use the technology. And as far as zoning goes, there are very few examples of it. So I think that there are maybe 2 examples in Michigan, one's in Kalamazoo, Western Michigan, one is somewhere else, I don't remember. So there are only a couple of existing examples in Michigan. The Graham Institute of Sustainability at the University of Michigan put together a model ordinance. And so I essentially pulled their model ordinance and brought it into here. The reason for including these items is that, as you know, Public Act 233 made utility scale installations of all these renewable energy sources something that is permittable through the MPSC everywhere in the state. As a result, there may be more interest in this and growing interest in this, both at that utility scale level and then at smaller scales. So a few things to think about with regard to this. One, in putting this together, my thought was to take kind of what we had from solar and from wind, put together kind of the basics for battery energy storage, and then give it 18 months, 24 months, something like that. There's a lot of movement on that, both in the development of the technology and the development of case law. It's expected to be challenged in several different ways. And so spending too much time on an ordinance that might be out of date just doesn't seem like the best use of our time. And so that's kind of why I put it together the way that I did, pulling from these other resources. As far as the items to discuss, so I sent this out a little bit later just to try to break it down. So this came out in your email just this afternoon. You may not have had a chance to look at it, and that's okay. This is just some suggested discussion points as you go through the ordinance. So if there's anything that you would like to see or like to change, of course, everything is on the table. This is just kind of a way to try to get our heads around it because it is a pretty hefty ordinance. So the main items here that might be worthy of some discussion, definitions. I did change the definitions that were included in the previous wind energy ordinance, just pulling some more modern language in. I thought that it was a little bit clearer. That was from Michigan State Extension wind ordinance. Solar energy systems. This is another big point. As you know, you spent quite a bit of time last year working on this ordinance. Now there's kind of a gap. There's a little bit of a donut hole. We talked about what we had called small scale, which are quite small, I think under 8,000 square feet, and then medium size, or we called them large scale, but they were still not especially large. So that large scale is still quite a bit under what the utility scale would be. And we're not entirely sure. We used square footage for our measurement. They use megawatts, and it's going to take a little bit more time for me to figure out how exactly all of that works together. That's not something I can do on the fly. So discussing and deciding, what do you want to do about that donut hole? Do you want to permit these mid-size systems in some kind of way? Or do you want to say, nope, you can build it up to this large, and otherwise you can't be larger unless you're going to do the MPSC thing through the state? Wind energy systems, are you good with this? Do you want to do more with it? What do you think? And then the battery energy storage systems. So let me say just a little bit more about battery energy storage. I also included in what I sent you earlier and on your dais some pictures that I pulled. These are all from the U of M report, the Sustainability Institute there. And this just gives an idea of what it is that we're actually talking about. So like most of these things, battery energy storage systems can come in all sizes. So you've got relatively small units that are located inside a home or outside a home. They're like the size of an air conditioner or generator, your typical home appliance type thing. Then you also have somewhat bigger ones that are the size of maybe one of those utility boxes that you see on the side of the road. And then they go all the way up to much larger installations. The larger installations have kind of an appearance of semi-trailers sitting around. So not the most attractive things, but they're relatively quiet and relatively stable. There's some noise associated with them. I've heard it referred to as like a road noise level of sound. So it's not silent, it's not piercing, but there is a little bit of sound. And my understanding is that's generally related to the cooling systems for the batteries. So with the batteries as well, right now, lithium ion is the primary type of battery that's used in these. One thing I learned is that there are 6 different chemistries of lithium ion batteries. I hadn't known that before. And those different chemistries have different functions. Some of them are more energy dense, so they're able to hold on to more energy. Some of them are more stable when it comes to thermal runaway. So thermal runaway is the primary danger when it comes to these lithium ion batteries and these battery installations. Rare, but when it happens, serious. When thermal runaway happens, it can release, there can be explosions. It can release hazardous gases. Firefighting methods, water is not especially effective. Not very much is especially effective. And so the preferred mode is to protect the surrounding area and just let it burn itself out. So that's something that I was kind of top of mind when I was looking at the ordinance. The setbacks that were established, there are setbacks that were recommended by the Graham Center, and they gave a range. So it would be like 100 to 300 feet or 50 to 100 feet. I chose the large ones in all the circumstances, just thinking, I'm a plan for the worst kind of person. If you're going to have something explode, let's have it explode just a little bit further away, even if we don't think that's ever going to happen. So that was my thinking behind that. These can be used in 2 different ways. So they're either placed independently away from, usually not too far away from, but away from a production and energy source is like a separate installation. Some of them are hybrid installations, so you'll have solar panels with battery energy systems, both kind of on the same site, one feeding the other. And those are for the large ones. Now for the small ones, one of the items that I put in, and I had mentioned that the fire chief is reviewing this. I've got a couple different people looking at it. I really wanted to take a little bit closer look at some of the smaller ones, even when it comes to some of our neighborhoods that are more vulnerable to fire. So Ottawa Beach and Mac Park were the ones I was thinking of. There are already additional regulations in some of those areas because fire can be so hazardous up there. It's hard to get in, the water supply is not as good, so might want to take a special look at that. There's some zoning questions and then landscaping questions. I pulled some language that I found in our wireless towers section ordinance, which I thought was helpful because it's very clear in defining this is exactly what you need. This is the type of buffer you need. And it says this is what you need, and the planning commission can say, no, I think that what's there already is fine. You can go less, but I appreciated the clarity in that. So I incorporated that. Questions, comments, discussion? Or would you like to start?
That looks good, go. Comments?
I think the battery systems for me, I still have other outstanding questions and I haven't gone through. I saw you sent an email this afternoon and I didn't have time to go through. But there was some additional I guess learnings or insights. I don't know if we happen to have any available, but more on the physical construction. So I understand that, you know, a worst case scenario we're thinking is going to be relatively unlikely. That being said, not understanding the physical structure of these, but keeping in mind the increasing frequency with which extreme weather events continue to occur. My concern is, you know, understanding that and then the potential risk, because if you have the larger scale and a lot of them and one of those events, if you're planning buffers based on a smaller number of those, right, I would still like to generally understand that. And especially as we're talking about, you know, where things are permitted based on zoning, just trying to have my head around, unfortunately, if something really bad or we were to have, you know, one of those terrible storms come through and we had that infrastructure, what is the worst that could happen? And then are we at least taking some measure of consideration? You know, so I certainly appreciate from the data that you do have, you've structured it based on the worst case from the data that we have. But I'm not well enough versed in the physical construction, but I do know that water and lithium ion batteries are not a great combination in general. So understanding, again, if we have those heavy winds or severe hail or, you know, how they're physically affixed to the earth, you know, what is a possible outcome and how catastrophic could that be? And then making sure that we're taking that into consideration.
So you're thinking of, when you say the physical structure, you're thinking of the ability to withstand things like hail and torrential rain and freeze thaw cycles and things like that.
Yes,
Okay.
and the potential for, you know, the straight line winds or, you know, I'm right. Yeah, like I honestly, we don't get them very often, but I would at least like to be making decisions based on the best information that we have, just because, again, if one of those goes flying and then it's adjacent to something that we weren't necessarily planning, at least having some perhaps additional guide rails and thoughts on, you know, where maybe from a zoning perspective, some of these larger installations or even medium ones would make sense, right? Because I don't know the damage of a, you know, we talked about, you mentioned something like the side of the boxes for utilities, right? I would like to understand if that were to get carried, damaged, smashed, water, what's the impact?
I would think these would be pretty well tied down.
I mean, we'd hope so,
Yeah.
but you just went and.
They're not manufactured housing.
I mean, you know, he just, they're not, but he just went and saw, you know, an area of the country that, you know, was impacted by a once in a lifetime, hopefully several lifetimes, you know, type of weather event. And it is just becoming a more increasing reality. It may not change the outcome, but that is something that I do think is important to at least have a measure of understanding.
Yeah, I can see what I can find out as far as the construction goes. I'm not sure how accessible that's gonna be, but I'll dig and see what I can find.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I'm curious if they'd have something like in Florida or Hawaii where things need to be tied down for hurricane strength. Right? You
Yep.
know, stainless, your roof has to be tied, your house has to be tied to the foundation. It can't just sit there.
Or look at Oklahoma where they have regular tornadoes.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Yep.
That's a lot.
Yeah, because it's hard.
Impact, more of a burst than a hurricane or cyclone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell based on the images, right? But it does kind of give me train car, semi-type construction, and I don't necessarily think of those as the most robust physical exterior structures.
Right.
Yeah,
It depends on the anchoring, you know, the foundation.
Yep.
And how it's fixed to the ground.
The thing that I think about for our community, I mean, we're not gonna have large scale stuff like this. I mean, hopefully our restrictions are much smaller. And if they are smaller, solar, wind, I mean, these are a part of the future, right?
Mhm.
I think lithium's going to sodium, and so that technology is changing very rapidly as we speak. I really do like what you're saying though, because literally, even if you're a smaller scale, these are big. We're not gonna have anything this big in Park Township, but even just say it's a lot smaller, stuff goes flying. And so, I mean, they said even in a residence, it would be the size of an air conditioning unit, well, how is that kind of stuff kind of secured outside? And so, I mean, I think we have to think smaller scale, but I mean, where you place it and how you secure it. And yeah, I mean, I think those are considerations.
I would be more worried about wind turbines than about these batteries, and I'd be more worried about solar panels flying off of their stands than these. These are going to be fairly dense and
I mean,
pretty well
That's it,
fastened.
you're gonna have a lot of weight in the battery.
Yeah.
Right.
you'll have a lot of weight, but I think it's the damage and the fire,
If it does happen.
the future risk,
Might
right?
not go flying, but it was damaged, you got those chemicals.
Exactly, that too, and especially knowing the current ability to fight those fires. But it is hard because the technology is also evolving.
Oh,
And,
right.
you know,
Very
we
fast.
make this ordinance, and as batteries continue to change.
I would hope and I would think that higher levels of government, the state, would have rules on these things. They have more capacity to look at it and do research and.
Well, there's gotta be some construction standards somewhere. I mean,
Right.
There's installments all
Yeah.
over the country.
I think it's just a matter of, and I feel a little uncomfortable
Right,
making
yeah,
decisions
yeah.
on what I don't know.
So I
Yep.
understand it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Just trust.
Well, you mentioned Oklahoma, and one of the examples here is in Texas, and they absolutely get tornadoes and similar types of weather having on there. So there's got to be a lot of acquired knowledge, I guess is the best way to put it, in terms of how these are protected, how they're mounted, how they're
Yep.
positioned and so forth. But yeah, I would agree. One of the things we're thinking about is, you know, what are we likely to see here? Right. You know, everything from not just the battery storage systems, but, you know, the small scale, you know, the technology changes that we talked about, you know, what takes 500 acres or 300 acres today could take a lot less in the future. So, yeah, I think, Mika, one of the things you said is how far do we go on this right now based on some of the things that are changing. And I know we're talking specifically about battery storage right now. But on things that we aren't likely to see that are tied to MPSC, do we spend a lot of time working on those pieces of it now? Because I think, you know, it does sound like there's going to be legal action. I'm sure some townships in some areas in the state are going to have concerns about what's been passed and how it's going to be implemented. So, I mean, we are just thinking about, you know, workload over the next few months.
Yeah, it's really just a question of your priorities. I mean, anything we pass, you need to be comfortable with. So that's not a question. But it is a question when we talk about how deep to dive into this. That could be pretty much an infinite deep dive. This is really technical and it's really new, so we could spend a lot of time on it. And if that's what you would like to prioritize, then by all means. It's not something that had been on our list previously and is a response to, state legislation or request to the board to make sure that we get something done. So that's just something to be balancing.
Thanks.
It seems to me that if we try to rely on people who know more than we do, University of Michigan probably does a lot of research on this. Look at what they do. Certainly we're not going to we don't have the capacity, the knowledge to do anything other than say, sounds reasonable to me.
Right.
And let's stay on the safe side and let's limit them somewhat, which we're just kind of fudging. I think is where we're going to have to end up.
Yeah. I think when we were looking too at the space that's required to be able to do these, one of the things that became really evident is that you don't need a lot of space for these.
Right.
As opposed to large scale solar, solar specifically from a panel standpoint, you can put an awful lot of battery capacity into a relatively small space.
Yeah, I think these battery storage are going to almost all the time be in conjunction with some energy generating thing.
Yes.
It had crossed my mind that you could, as part of the utility system, have big energy storage that you build up during the night when nobody wants energy, and then you dispense it during the day. And maybe they would do that, so these would be freestanding and coming off the power lines. But I don't know if that will happen. I would think it'd be a pretty expensive solution.
Would the Michigan Townships Association be able to provide any input? They seem to be more focused on our size of a area.
Input in what way? I haven't looked at what they have out there, but.
Regulations as to the ability to withstand certain catastrophic effects, wind.
Yeah, I could see.
At the Planning Association's conference and then at the Township Association conference, both they had workshops on that,
Right.
but it was mainly just wrapping their head around the law itself and what it means. I don't think they have any real in-depth knowledge or instructional or anything like that on construction and maintenance of anything like that. I think that's probably yet to be developed by some of the townships that are going to be the leaders in installing some of these things. And they're probably going to be learning as they go as far as setting standards and that. So,
and I think batteries were the least discussed as part of that.
oh yeah, yeah. As a matter of fact, in both those conferences,
Yeah.
they didn't discuss the battery storage at all. That's that came up this month.
It did when I started putting things together and I realized, wait, there's a third section.
Right. Well, and everything prior to that was
Also,
it's either, on-site use or feeding into the grid.
yeah.
Right.
So, but the battery storage it's a whole other animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty involved.
I would assume the area would want to have, that closer understanding is as it relates to, our smaller scale solar ordinance, especially, as we've created something that will allow opportunities for residential and really considering, right, if I know they have the images of the ones that are inside the structure, but are we going to, is there a reason, thinking about, and I'm not real good, size wise to comparing it to megawatts on what is appropriate in certain zoning districts. I think, you were taking conservative approaches based on areas that are maybe more historically still at risk for firefighting measures in general, but being able to understand what that means in relation to, parcel sizes and,
Right.
I'm thinking about my neighborhood and what that could look like in the future in association with, sure they can do their solar panels, they want to have battery storage, how.
Well, I can give an example. My sister lives in Hawaii and they have solar and they have a battery pack on the wall and it's maybe that that big.
Something like that.
Yeah, I've seen them in the pictures.
Yeah, like that,
Yeah.
smaller than a refrigerator.
Yeah.
So they're not big in a community, in for
And
local.
then that's a storage unit. That's a storage unit.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Well, so I guess my question is it not big because that's currently what's the opportunity that they have based on, cost and space? Like, do we need to think about it in terms of, the megawatts or the space or the danger relative to, and this is where it's kind of difficult for me, right? Because I don't fully understand that level of detail, other than if that were to catch on fire, that's going to be a much bigger hazard, not only for the individual who has it, but likely those that are immediately adjacent. And
So that's a whole nother issue aside from what we're talking about.
well, I mean, it would,
Insurance companies are even going after electric car owners and putting restrictions on their
Yeah.
chargers and stuff like that. I forget which insurance company it was, and they said that rates just like increased tenfold. If
Yeah.
you have a Tesla car charger in your garage.
Ooh, they haven't come after me yet.
Well, you must have the right insurance company.
Well, now it's recorded. So-
Yeah.
They may, yeah, you might get a phone call.
I mean, that's, the chargers are using your household current. But this is, you're creating new electricity and just storing it. I mean, it's
Right.
like, imagine this thing just buzzing and humming and,
Mhm.
with all the electricity inside it, and then something happens. So insurance companies are gonna deploy that a lot.
I can find out about that. My impression is that the hazard level for the smaller ones isn't nearly as high, that it's much more a fire hazard, which, I mean, which does happen, and I've been hearing that even with e-bikes, if you've got e-bikes in your garage, just
Oh,
be
yeah.
mindful of the fact that that is
Yeah, right,
something
same
that can
thing.
catch on.
I don't
That's
have
happened
those.
relatively often. Where's the
Yeah, me
why?
neither.
But my impression is that that's more like any residential fire. That part is difficult to put out, but it's more manageable. It's more when it gets to the bigger sizes.
Okay.
So I can do some asking to get a little bit more detail on that, but that's my impression so far.
So I'd like to go down the discussion points and make sure we hit them all, because these are ones Mika specifically asked about. And then if you have other comments from going through the versions, we can hit those. Wind energy system, well, you revised that. I didn't see anything in there, I don't think. One thing I did see, page 4 of the old version. Which is it, page 4 of the new version?
I just changed colors. I hope the color that
You've got
maybe
one-
didn't change.
One version.
Yeah, page 4, okay, under item 2, page 4, it talks about renewable energy systems. We don't have it defined. I don't know if we need to, but it struck me that probably would be good to add. That's all I had in the definitions section. Anybody else? Look where my notes are. Yeah, it's just right at the beginning.
Yeah,
first
yeah,
few
yeah, I know,
pages.
I was just thinking.
I mean, the
Um,
definitions made sense to me when I read them. I mean, I'm
Right.
not technical enough to know, if this word should change from one thing to another. I'm just relying upon the research. So,
Right.
yeah. So it
so-
makes sense.
Solar energy systems, first question is, we don't permit any ground mounted systems on parcels the size of Stephanie's, 15,000 square feet. Do we like that? I drove back roads to Grand Rapids and went past some house that had I don't know, solar energy panel. How big was it? Maybe to here in the corner, on 2 stilts in the yard at about 5 feet high. And I think there were 2 rows of panels.
Panels, yeah.
I couldn't really tell, but, which is a good thing, you know, you kind of look through it because they were sitting like this. So it didn't seem terrible to me, you know, it looked kind of like an old clothesline or something. If anybody remembers days of clothesline. Oh, yeah. So the question is, should we keep it that way, no ground mounted, on smaller lots? Having looked at solar, my inclination is I don't want to put it on my roof. Because then I have to deal with, okay, am I replacing the roof? Then I have to replace the solar. Am I replacing the solar? I probably should do the roof. It'd be much cleaner in the yard if it could be put somewhere where it wasn't too objectionable. It reminds me of the old, what do they call them, discs for TV?
Oh, yeah. Satellites.
Satellite discs, yeah. Like, where can you put this where it's not too ugly?
You
Yeah. Make them smaller, that's the
can't.
point.
You put it in the middle of the forest where it doesn't get any connection.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
No comments? Keep it as is?
I would prefer to keep it as is.
Okay.
It still made sense to me.
The next question is a real interesting one. Mika hinted at it before. We allow the biggest square footage, as she said, we went by square feet. This is on page 8. There's a table of how many square feet of signage, it's not signage, solarage.
Solarage.
We allow, the biggest one is 4,200 on things over an acre. And each panel is about 20 watts per square foot is what I looked up. And so if we have 4,200 times 20 is, 84 kilowatts. And so that's about as big under current technology as we allow. So that's 84 kilowatts, and then the government kicks in is 50 megawatts. So 1,000 almost times bigger. And there's that gap in the middle. Right now, we don't allow that at all. And is that something do we want to leave it that way, or do we want to say, well, maybe we could do more?
Just one note, that was for the small scale solar systems. The large scale, they have what we call large scale, which is, it doesn't look so large anymore, but that one goes up to 8,000 square feet. So that.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
There's
I missed that.
very similar gap. Yeah, that's kind of hidden in the definitions.
So large scale is with a
Defined on
nameplate
page-
capacity of 50 megawatts or greater. So
No,
where's that
so-
other part?
So maybe that needs to be clarified. That's on page 9. It's defined on page 3. A solar energy system mounted on support posts, blah, 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 greater than 8,000 square feet of the entire system. So it should probably be clarified. Large scale is defined as anything over 8,000 square feet. And then there's a clause right there that just says over 50 megawatt capacity. So those should probably be separated to make if you wanted to keep them to do something more like mid-size, extra large.
Oh, it's a ground mounted large scale. Yeah, that's confusing to me to have large scale be 50 megawatts on large scale.
That's probably an adjustment we should make to say, if you wanted to keep all the regulation as it is, mid-size, call it mid-size or something.
Mid-size, yeah.
I think that's a good
Utility
idea.
scale and would be large scale. Then we'd be using the same terminology. Yep.
But now we define it as greater than 8,000 square feet, but we don't allow. Or do we? That's small scale. So then large scale or medium scale now, or mid scale, whatever, is now controlled. Where?
Page 5. So ground mounted, large scale, allowed as a special use in ag and open space, not permitted in R1, R2, R3, R4, R5. Can be permitted in a PUD approval or as a major amendment and permitted in C1 and public lands and open space. C1, C2, public lands and open space.
That gets up to 160 kilowatts, roughly speaking. But we still have that gap between kilowatts and megawatts. Now, if we say this is what we allow, and if somebody came in and said, you got this big gap here, we'd say, yeah, too bad.
That's an option. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you can say this is really as big as we'd like it to be in our community. And the state's requiring us to permit these extra large sizes, and so they can do that. But aside from that requirement, you know, we're comfortable approving up to X amount. So that is an option.
Or they could make a request for special use.
They could make a
For
request,
the mid-size,
I think.
I mean, where we saying the gap is?
Well, if it's, yeah, so between like what we currently have is our largest and there, we could do, yeah, we could add that it could be a special use. Right now, the way that it's written, I think it would have to be, I don't know if you can do a variance with a special use. I'd have to talk to Dan about exactly how those pieces would work together. There's
But, I
usually
mean,
some
to
kind of.
the point that we don't need to address it specifically in detail right now.
We don't have to, no.
Right.
I like it.
Yeah.
We'll deal with it if and when it
When,
happens.
yeah,
Most likely.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that limits another handy reference is half your lot size of solar panels would be the maximum. I personally think we should allow more,
What,
but
you're talking 8,000?
8,000. Yeah, her lots in her subdivision are around 15,000.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them. Well, yeah, you've got a.
That's your standard RPA lot.
Think of it this way, if you have a 100-foot wide lot, you got a 40-foot setback from the road.
Yeah.
2 lots times that 40-foot setback is 8,000 feet.
Yeah.
So that's what we're saying is the largest permissive, but I can't imagine anybody in the township that would want or need something like that.
Not for their house, except
Well, not
Except-
for sure.
for farms.
Farmers could,
Yeah, I could see it out with some farm use. I think we might actually have one that came through before this was even being discussed. That's powering some agricultural buildings. And I could, that would be an interesting thing for me to look at, for us to look at to see what size that actually is.
I mean, I think we should be bigger personally to allow it use on farms for dual use. I don't know if dual use, that's shipping some off, but at least to power the farm, power the irrigation equipment. I mean, they might need more than that.
The 8,000 square feet, that definition came from somewhere else, didn't it?
I don't remember anymore. It was a year ago.
Because I think we plucked that out somewhere when we first started talking about this.
Yeah, I can see if I can dig that.
Somebody already defined large scale and small scale for us.
That sounds right, yeah, which may have changed since last year.
it may change again in the next year.
Looking towards the future, blueberry farming is going to have to get more internally or vertically integrated. They're going to have to put large freezer storage right on site and eliminate that middleman where they ship it off to somebody to hold it until it's finally sold. So we have to keep that in mind. They might need power to run that refrigeration equipment.
But I mean, if you listen to the blueberry farmers around here, you know, installing that kind of storage. And then the price of the capital for investing in the solar. I can't imagine they even consider spending that kind of money to. I don't know what the return on investment would be.
Yeah, I think there would have to be, you know, some significant outside incentives to make it worth their while, and it
Well,
doesn't.
Yeah, there is some federal tax incentives, but
Well, I mean, there has to be enough of it to offset
Right.
still the cost of operation for them, which I still, even with what exists, I wouldn't sign up for that in the current state if I were them personally.
That's something that we could ask them about, that we could approach them about, but we do have at least one grower who's building larger things, like what Dennis was saying about that vertical integration is that you can't just grow blueberries anymore on 10 acres in your spare time.
Yeah.
You've got to have that large operation. And so we do see people doing that. Not a lot, but it tends to be you've got some bigger farmers that are growing and then the others who aren't able to make it anymore.
Well, the Orman, when they were here, they even made that comment, you know,
Yeah.
one of the ways to do it is just to get bigger.
Yep. But I think if we're gonna look at, you know, an ag use specifically, I think we need to understand what's more realistic for that particular purpose. Because I mean, unless you guys have a better idea at this point in time, I would say, you know, arbitrarily picking a size without understanding what we're trying to solve for isn't really buying us anything and making a change to what we have.
Well, the other option is you make the ordinance and then somebody comes in and says, your ordinance is dumb. It doesn't work. We need
Here's what we.
16,000 square feet. And then we say, well, tell me more about it. We do some research. No, you're right. Okay, we'll change the ordinance.
Right.
Yep, I would absolutely would be on board with that.
What you know right now.
Yeah,
Well, on the flip side of blueberry farming too, this could become a secondary crop,
Right.
right? I mean, it,
Oh, indeed.
maybe they don't need it for their own use as much as they
Right.
need
Right,
additional
like we talked
income.
about originally, one of
Right.
the primary uses is putting it back into the grid.
Right.
And getting a check instead of paying your electric bill.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
well, and I think it's important too, obviously, blueberries are what's here. It doesn't mean it's what will be here
Right.
50 years from now,
Right.
you know, like thinking truly long-term. As the environment continues to change, it may become more conducive for other crops. So certainly keeping that in mind, but we've obviously heard there's a plethora of challenges as it is with that particular crop. But it doesn't mean that other crops in other operations wouldn't make sense, but having that understanding. So
Right.
personally, I'm okay if we leave it where it is for now. And then if there's a need to come back and reevaluate when there's more information, I think it would be perfectly.
Let the demand help drive it.
Yeah.
I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, I think what you were getting at is that if we want to keep blueberries, this might be another way for them to get some income to
Yes,
help them stay in
Yeah.
business.
yeah.
And my
There's
understanding
a
was,
dual use and a dual purpose here.
Yeah.
my understanding is that sometime in the next, before the next master plan, that we are gonna do a deeper dive with the blueberry farmers and start to look at what the future state of that might look like. And some of that might be a combination of the solar farm, and that, to me, we need to do that understanding and really, so put something in here now that's a placeholder. Don't spend a lot of time on it. And then let's do that deeper dive and see what could be real for Park Township. We don't need to get bigger than what we have here. You know, we say 15 acres, you know, what would that entail? And then we could come back in and rewrite some of this stuff. But to me, we're trying to write something too fast for what we don't know.
Yeah.
Yep.
Too many unknowns.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I might say, I thought it earlier, that there are some townships, I believe, who want to have solar. They have land that they want to find a use for. That's not the case here.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
But we also had a conversation about infrastructure that's needed to support this too. And we may or may not have that.
just the power lines.
Right.
Right.
I want to tie into a power line. There aren't any. Oh,
What were we talking about? Yeah, exactly.
Open input into it.
okay. So I think we might have beat up solar energy sufficiently.
So no changes.
Right.
I believe that's correct.
Very good.
In summary, wind energy. I didn't see anything there. Anybody else?
I did not. I went through it.
I didn't, and as far as I can tell, it hasn't been a point of contention to date since it was put in place in 2009. So
Right.
if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Sections 3 and 4 looked identical to me.
I made that same comment.
I probably pasted it twice.
Yeah, the only thing that's different is the highlighted red portion.
Oh, where I thought I better go double check if
Mhm.
Yeah,
those sections are still
second
correct.
version of it has a little bit more verbiage to it.
But other than that, I think the big push in this was because people didn't want turbines in Lake Michigan,
Right. In the water. Yeah.
which we don't control anyway, or maybe not in Lake Mac, which we don't control anyway. But there was a big fear of.
California did, right?
Oh, yeah. California, Texas. Yeah. Gulf, big time.
Because the one thing I saw was, the sections on the landscaping and
Mhm.
buffers and the decommissioning were a little bit inconsistent between the different types.
Between like the wind.
The solar, the wind
Okay.
and the battery storage.
I tried to,
Yeah, maybe you just want to look at that and kind
I will
of,
double
especially
check.
the decommissioning, I think one was 180 days and one was 18 months.
yeah, I tried to get those all aligned, but yes, I will go back to it
Yeah.
and look at it again.
I would think the screening could be consistent across all of them.
That was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, some of it we can discuss in detail later, but.
Yep,
I
I'll
was
go back
a
to it.
little confused, like. It's 10 feet outside the perimeter of the fence. It's like, well, would you put the fence on the property line or you put a buffer in the right of way or? I just didn't know. I had questions about that.
So I think with that, some of these installations, you've got the core system itself, and then there will be a perimeter fence around that core system, which might not be at the property line, it's
Mhm.
further into the property. And so I think that with that one, that was intended that you've got the perimeter fence and then whatever landscaping is buffering between the fence and the property line.
Right, and then I think on the small scale, there was something about, maybe if it was even in residential or PUD or something like that, that there was a brush line that they had to clear out so far from the installation.
Yes.
And then the other seemed like we were putting landscape to hide it, so.
Oh.
It was kind of a conflict.
Okay, yeah, that's a good thing to clarify.
Yeah, I just, you know, when we go through it, just make things consistent.
Yes, yep, will do.
I do recall maybe some of that from the solar where we were looking to have some sort of buffer
Yeah.
between,
You know, there's like a 10-foot brush free zone.
yeah, like
Yeah.
to have like a safety
And then on the
buffer.
bigger ones, we're trying to like cover them.
Yeah, but just, yeah, being consistent there, but also understanding, I guess.
Oh, another thing that I picked up on too was, for the solar installations, it said something about minimizing. Removal of mature trees or something like that. But mature trees are gonna cause shade and you conducive to solar.
Depending what side they're on. But
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, but if, yeah, right.
I'm trying to remember,
Yeah,
because I
only half the day, right?
Yeah, well, no, if they're on the north, you're generally pretty good.
Only on the north
we
side.
talked about that. I think,
Well, it's kind of like the subdivisions and things, you want to keep the natural, there we want, if we have hills, we want to keep them. If we have big trees, we want to keep them. So I
Right.
think here, it's like, don't go in and just mow everything down. You leave trees if you can.
you might need
Yeah.
to be a certain distance from the panels, but you can,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll look at that too.
A battery energy storage system, small off-site battery energy storage, which is nameplate of 20 megawatts or less. Its primary purpose of off-site is through the electrical grid, not used on site. So then the question here is, should we discuss setbacks in Mac Park regarding? But would anybody really want to put an off-site in one? I would think my inclination is don't put it there. If you're not going to use it for your house,
Right.
don't be putting it in those areas.
Exactly. You don't have a lot of room to work with.
Right.
I think that's a mistake on my,
Okay.
that should be on site. So if you've got those small on site ones.
That makes more sense. Regarding averaging, I don't know, but I would think you would want it more or less attached to the house.
Yeah, my thinking with that is that, in most zoning districts, you've already got a decent amount of space between the houses. You've got, in Ottawa Beach and Mac Park, and in Macatawa Park in particular, you can take the average of 3 houses within 300 feet. And then 75% of that and make that your side yard setback. I think with a minimum of 5 feet. So that just pulls it in quite a bit more. So, with something like this, do you want to say, yeah, that's fine? Or do you want to say, nah, that should be a little bit further away from the property line, given the fire hazard? And I haven't heard back from the fire chief yet. I'll run that by him too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question for him, and those are pretty heavily wooded, so there's not going to be much solar.
Right.
I wouldn't think any.
Right.
Like patio lights up there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't see that it will be much of a problem. There may be a few houses that can do something, but
Maybe right on Lake Michigan or something.
yeah.
So it's not presently part of our zoning. But we had previously had a discussion about, an applicant wanting to do essentially multiple units on a single property. Differently maybe than your typical,
The one from
apartment.
last.
Yeah,
month
and,
it
and
was-
thinking about, varied housing and how this may apply, and just throwing this out there. Does it make sense to base it off of, like you said, the, minimum distance between structures, buildings, not necessarily lot size, if one of our other goals is to look at how we perhaps reevaluate our zoning and how we accommodate different housing opportunities. So thinking about that 16th and Central location where technically on a single property, you've got multiple. And so trying to do it just by lot size when we're thinking about something that has a potential safety implication, right? Like, I think that would then cause a conflict there. And that was one of the other things that I was considering. Obviously, that's not part of our current plan. It's something for us to discuss in the future. But I do think, how we choose to define that may also have an implication on some other things that are on our to-do list later on that we'd want to be mindful of.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a really good question for the fire chief.
Yeah.
And I think your idea of making it distance between, rather than the property line having to do with the buildings is excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how
But
much
that's
more
the real
complicated
concern.
that makes this, but yeah, like.
I mean, side yard setbacks are partially for safety.
So I think between this meeting and next meeting, I'll pin down the fire chief and see what he thinks as far as needs go. And I'll also talk to the building official and find out, are there any extra things that are currently required for these systems? If you have structures that are closer than 10 feet together, I think it is, you have to add additional firewalls and fireproofing between the structures. So there may be something like that that already exists in the building code, which would help. I was very specifically thinking of Mac Park and Auto Beach because those are very high hazard areas. So like unique, very unique, uniquely high hazard areas.
Yeah, and totally makes sense because that exists today. And obviously talking about something that may take quite a while, if ever, to come to fruition, but just.
That's a great comment. The next one is medium off-site. So the ordinance gave a range. And we could put them all at the high end, and I'm sure that this group is happy with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
The next one, the zoning districts identified for off-site, which is page 17, would be least disruptive. So if I go to off-site battery on 17, small are permitted R1, ag, and C1. So R1 is large lots, ag, of course, and commercial. And then medium permitted in ag, subject to site plan review. In R1 and C1, there's special use, which would be approval like we had tonight. And then is there another page 18? Nope. Seems reasonable to me. I don't mean to drive it, but wind and rain.
Sounds like it. Not snow.
Peter might have found it.
Oh, maybe that's it. Wind.
Wind.
Yeah, sure.
Mechanically induced.
Landscaping, we discussed that. Yes? Yeah. And any other things that have come up that you noticed that you think that could help Mika to put it together? I know there are some notes and corrections that you already have notes on, like ZP and stuff like that. So that when this comes back to us next time, it'll be, oh, perfect. I don't have any other notes on my
Let's
read through.
Think we're good.
Everybody good? You good?
Good.
Nice
Okay.
job. Thank you.
Yes.
Very good job.
It's an awful lot of.
Yeah, I think it's getting something in there and we'll never write a perfect one. All right, next item on the agenda, other business and announcements.
Zoning Board of Appeals. We had somewhat of a contentious,
Oh, good.
period at our last meeting. A number of what I would call provincial residents came to the meeting and expressed concern about setting a precedent with the side yard setback. But the applicant had made every accommodation, including designing the home so that it fit the area, was within the footprint of the lot. So we as a board voted unanimously to give them the variance. And I haven't gotten any negative feedback post-meeting.
I've gotten a couple questions.
Okay, well, maybe you want to weigh in then. But we did feel that the applicant made the accommodations that we would require as a board.
What was the basic question?
So it was within the Edgewood Beach neighborhood and it was one of the lake parcels.
Overlay district.
Yep, it was in the overlay district. So they had a variance from January 23, a year or so ago, where it was an expansion of an existing nonconformity. The house was kind of jagged like this, and they were going to square it off. Some of those areas were within about 2 feet of the property line, but it was an existing cottage. They were going to try to expand. Once they got into it, they realized that that wasn't going to be viable, and so they took it down. They were trying to work within the health department requirements for where you can site both well and septic, and it's a tight neighborhood, so there were very few options for that. They needed to be able to get the well rig in both for installation and for servicing and have enough room to move. They had and then they're on a dune, they're in a critical dunes area. So Eagle had to find that setback. It left a pretty small envelope for building. So it's about a 1,400 square foot envelope for building. So their total side yard setbacks were actually about 19 feet, but they had it shifted just a little bit to the side for that well. It was also a 1-story structure with a steeply pitched roof to preserve light for the neighbors. So it was a pretty, as far as, the ZBA is usually addressing, like you heard the standards tonight, the questions are, is this a self-created issue? Is there a practical difficulty here? Kind of what's happening on this parcel, but makes the regular rules not apply. And there were several factors that made the rules not apply. So from that standpoint, it was pretty clear, but it was tricky for the neighbors.
And people who live on the lake tend to be a little, should I say, selfish, some of them. Protective of their, yeah, I like that better.
We have a brouhaha going up in Port Sheldon Township with consumers moving out, and all those property owners are trying to keep public access out of the future plan.
Can we say big red? We don't, yeah, you can't come here to this public place. We want to control that, yeah. Like, people are protective, was that the word? Protective. Yeah.
So other than that one item that was contentious, the meeting went according to plan.
And she's officially on the board now. We need to replace Terry, who's obviously not here, and I don't know who they're going to pick to replace. And no, I don't. I haven't talked to anybody about it, but I have a guess. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll talk to him and tell him who I want or don't want. Okay, and Howard has asked me, and I've forgotten to bring it up the last meeting, that he would like a representative from the Planning Commission on his farmland preservation group committee, whatever they call it. And he said they maybe would start out meeting once every couple of months. They're trying to figure out how to fund farmland preservation or what kind of, how to approach it, what can we do? So if there's somebody on here who's interested and wants more to do in their life, I know you're busy with the community center. You're kind of probably gonna be busy.
I'm gonna be a little busy.
She's
So-
creating her own community.
And then the other person will be on the trustee, will be the trustee, so let's see. You're not the chair yet, huh?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, super.
You just do what everybody else.
I was getting- I was- You was kind of ready, right?
You can't do it. You can't do it. I'll do it.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Good idea.
That actually sounds interesting to me, so.
Yeah, I thought it might be.
It'd be great. Relenting, I'm interested.
Yeah. And we got word today that we won, I think you got an email on it probably, the immediate decision on short-term rentals. And did you talk to Howard later in the day?
Yes. So, yeah, our reading of the judge's written decision is that we prevailed on the lawsuit. It is kind of a limited evaluation. What the judge said was that the plaintiffs hadn't exhausted their administrative remedies. So he said he didn't have jurisdiction over the case yet. So it wasn't decided so much on the merits of the case. It was decided on whether the judge had jurisdiction, and he determined that he did not. So what that means is that he's identified their next step as the zoning board of appeals. So then in some fashion, the zoning board of appeals would make a ruling. Typically that happens through an application coming through the ZBA. There may be a couple other avenues, but that's the normal way. Once something has been decided by the ZBA, the recourse after that is to appeal to circuit court. So that goes for anything. If you don't like the decision on a variance, you appeal to circuit court. That's how that part works. So at this point, we are able to, the restriction on us enforcing the ordinance has been lifted. And so we are able to begin enforcement activities. We're going to take some time to make sure that we're clear on what our next steps are going to be. So we're not going to jump into it tomorrow. We want to make sure that we're doing this right and in the way that makes best sense in the long run. But that is the direction that it's going. So that's where we're at right now.
And there's anybody's guess as to what the reaction will be and how much Dennis and his friends will see.
Yeah, I hope we're planning on how this application comes forward.
I've raised that several times.
So, any other comments, announcements?
I can just give a quick update on the next steps for the community center. So basically, the board of trustees said, we like it. It looks like something that the community would support. So the next thing we're doing now is I'm actually writing a request for proposal to bring design build people in. And so, and we're gonna have that ready to go for early January. So basically, contractor and architect team up and come in and give us a proposal. And then we will go through a selection process, come up with our top 2 or so. And then they will actually look at our pricing and they'll say, you said $20 million is really going to be 22. I mean, so, we're going to verify that. And what we're trying to do is to get all of that work done so we can be ready for a village in May, which basically means we need to select the architect. We need to actually do some early conceptual drawings of what this facility could look like, because if you're going to ask people in a village to fund something, they're going to need a little bit more of a visual on what that looks like. And then we need to socialize that. And so we're moving pretty fast to get all this stuff ready for a village in May. So that's kind of where we are.
Cool. And how's it going on the board so far?
And a bunch of work as usual. And got a text message at 9:30 that we prevailed in the lawsuit. And I think my first day was pretty good.
They all got sworn in yesterday.
Yeah.
So, okay, any other comments, questions?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Cool.